inside chat message.jsx, we're going to paste the component. And again, we'll scroll up and fix the ESLint errors. So first, it's telling us we're not using this component in this file. To fix this, at the front, we're going to export this component so it can be used in other files. If we scroll down, ESLint tells us that these images are missing. So we need to move those imports into this file. We'll go back to app.jsx, and at the top, we're going to select these two image imports, and we're going to cut. And inside chat message.jsx, we're going to scroll to the top and paste. Now, one thing we need to be careful about is that we may need to update these file paths. So now, this file is inside the components folder. That means // is going to start at the components folder. It's not going to be able to find the assets folder anymore. To fix this, at the front, we're going to use //. So just like in the command line, .. represents the outer folder. This means it's going to go out of this components folder and into the source folder. And then it's going to look for the assets folder. It's going to find it, and it will go into the assets folder and find robot.png. And we need to make the same change for the user image. At the front, we'll use .. to go out of the components folder into source, and then we can locate the assets folder. And now these imports will work correctly, and we finished moving the chat message component into its own file. Let's save, and we'll go back to app.jsx, and we'll move the chat messages component into its own file. Inside the components folder, we'll click it. We'll click this icon to create a new file, and let's name it the same as the component, capital C chat, capital M messages, .jsx, and press enter. We'll go back to app.jsx, and we'll select the code for this component, which is till here, and we're going to cut. And inside chat messages, we're going to paste. Let's scroll to the top. And this component needs useRef and useEffect. So let's move those imports into this file. We'll go to app.jsx. We'll select this import at the top and copy. And in chat messages, at the top, we're going to paste that import. And in this component, we do not use useState, so we can remove it. Let's scroll down. And in this component, we also use the chat message component. So let's import that. We'll scroll up, and at the top, we'll import, curly brackets, the chat message component from a string, and we'll locate this file using // so it starts in the current folder, which is the components folder, and we'll look for the file chat message. And remember, we don't have to add .jsx at the end. Vite can automatically add it. Finally, ESLint tells us this component is not used in this file, so we need to export it. However, we're going to do something different this time. Instead of typing export at the front of this function, we're going to scroll down to the bottom. And at the end, we're going to type export default. And then what we want to export, which is the chat messages component. As a review, this is called a default export. it's useful if we want to export one thing from a file. So now let's save. And to import this, we're going to go to app.jsx. And at the top, we're going to import. And for a default export, we can just type a name without curly brackets. So we can type chat messages. We'll import it from a string, and we'll type // to start in the current folder. So for this file, we're in the source folder, and then we're going to go into the components folder. Components / and locate chat messages. So this imports whatever the default export is from this file and names it chat messages. This feature is called a default export. When we import and we use curly brackets like up here, this is called a named export. So some people like using default exports because it encourages each file to focus on one thing. However, it's up to you which style of export you want to use. You'll also find that some packages use named exports, while other packages use default exports. So this is just a review of JavaScript modules. If you want to learn about modules in more detail, you can check out my JavaScript full course in the video description. Next, let's fix these last few errors. So we're not using useRef or useEffect in this file anymore. So we can remove these. And finally, this app component is already in a file called app.jsx. So we can just leave it in this file. And usually we put the app component outside of the components folder because app represents the entire application. It's sort of the most outer component of our application. So it makes sense to put it in the outer folder. So now let's save this file. And let's make sure that all these other files are saved. And now we'll open our website in the browser and try it out. And it looks pretty good. Let's refresh just to be safe. And we'll give it a try. We'll click this text box and type the message, hello, and press send. So it's working correctly, just like before. So we'll go back. And now we separated each component into its own file. And this makes our code easier to work with because each file only focuses on one component, and each file contains less code. The last thing we're going to do in this lesson is to separate the CSS into different files. So let's open app.css. And you'll notice that in here, it contains CSS for multiple components. So we're also going to separate the CSS so that each component has its own CSS file. For example, this CSS code is related to the chat input component. So we'll go to the components folder and click it. And we'll click up here to create a new file. And we're going to name it the same as the component, capital C chat, capital I input, .css, and press enter. And we'll move all the CSS related to the chat input component in here. So in app.css, we'll select this code for the send button, the chat input, and the chat input container. And we'll cut, and inside chat input.css, we're going to paste that code and save. And now to load this CSS code, we're going to open chatinput.jsx. And at the top, we're going to import a string and the CSS file we want to load, which is this one. So we'll type / to start in the current folder, which is components, and we'll load chat input.css and save. As a review, this is a feature of Vite. If we import a CSS file, it will load all the CSS in the file and apply it to the website. Next, let's go back to app.css. And these styles are for the app component. So it actually makes sense to leave them inside the app.css file. Below this, these styles are for the chat message component. So let's create a CSS file for the chat message component. We'll go into the components folder and click here to create a new file. And we'll name this chat message.css and press enter. And we'll go back to app.css. And we're going to select the styles for the chat message user, the chat message robot, the text, as well as the chat message profile. And cut. And then inside chat message.css, we're going to paste the CSS code and save. And we're going to load this by going into chat message.jsx. And at the top, we're going to import a string, and we'll import this file using /chat message.css and save. We'll go back to app.css. Finally, these styles are for the chat messages component. First, we'll create a CSS file for this component. So we'll click this folder and click here to create a new file, and we'll name it chat messages.css and press enter. And in app.css, we're going to select this code and cut. And in chat messages.css, we're going to paste and save. And we'll load this by opening chat messages.jsx. And at the top, we will import a string, and we'll locate the file ./chat messages.css and save. And finally, we'll go back to app.css and make sure that we save all of our files. Now let's open our website in the browser. And everything should look and work correctly. Let's go back to our code. And that's it. We split up our JavaScript and our CSS code into separate files. And now each component has its own JavaScript file and its own CSS file. This makes our code a lot easier to work with because each file is focused on only one component, and each file contains less code. In the next lesson, we'll use this new React setup to work on a bigger React project, which is an e-commerce website that has multiple pages and more advanced features. And that's the end of this lesson. In this lesson, we created a proper React setup using the command line, npm, and Vite. We reviewed the command line, which lets us give commands to our computer. We reviewed npm, which helps us download and use external libraries or packages. We learned the create Vite package, which helps us create a proper React setup. We moved our chatbot project into the new React setup. We learned how to use ESLint, which highlights problems in our JavaScript code. We reviewed JavaScript modules, which lets us separate our code into different files. And we separated each component in the chatbot project into its own JavaScript and CSS files. Thanks for watching so far. If you find this course valuable, you can support the channel by liking this video, leaving a comment, and subscribing. You can also check out the premium version of this course, where you'll get all the lessons ads-free, broken down into small videos. as well as additional lessons and more projects that are not in the public React course. Currently, the premium course contains 11 lessons, and I'll be adding more lessons in the future. You can also get a certificate of completion, create comments or questions on specific topics, get progress tracking, search, and course notes. You can also check out the membership, where you can get this course ads-free, separated by each lesson, AI videos, backend tutorials, and more. Thanks again, and let's continue with the course. Here are some exercises to help you practice what we learned in this lesson. In this lesson, we're going to start a bigger project using React, and we'll learn an important feature called routing. By the way, if something in this lesson does not work for you, you can check the troubleshooting guide in the description. First, let's take a look at the project we're going to build. In our browser, we're going to create a new tab, and at the top, we're going to go to supersimple.dev/projects/e-commerce. And we can close these other tabs. This is an e-commerce project or an online shopping project. We can add products to our cart, and then we can click here to view our cart. And this page will display all the products in our cart. It will calculate the total for our order, and it will also calculate a delivery date. And then we can create an order. And this page will list all of the orders that we created. We can also click this button to track the order. So depending on the delivery date, it will show you the progress of the delivery. And we'll click here to go back to the orders page. So notice that this project has multiple pages, so it's much bigger than the chatbot project. And we're working with more data than before. So we have products, we have a cart, and we have orders. By the way, if you ever need to reset the cart or the orders, you can click this reset button here in the bottom right. And it will reset everything back to the default data. So let's click the top left to go back to the main page. And now that we introduced the project, we're going to build this with React. We'll go back to VS Code and we'll collapse the chatbot project folder. And before we create a new React project, let's group these older files into a folder. We'll click this HTML file and we'll create a folder. And let's name it React-Basics. And we're going to move all these files into this folder. Now, a shortcut here is to click this file and then press Shift on your keyboard and click the bottom file. And it will select all the files between those two. And we can drag this into the folder. And we'll collapse it. So that just helps us stay a little more organized. Next, we're going to set up a new React project using Vite. To do that, we're going to go to our terminal. If you have the Vite server running, you can close it by pressing Ctrl-C on Windows or Ctrl-C on Mac. So if you're continuing from the previous lesson, the terminal should be running inside the chatbot project folder. To confirm that, we can run print working directory or pwd, and it will tell us that we're inside the chatbot project folder. Now, to set up a new React project, we want to be inside the React-course folder. So to get out of the chatbot project folder, we can run the command cd ... And if we press pwd, we should be inside the React-course folder. Another way to do this is to just start a new terminal. Now we'll use Vite again to set up a new React project. In the command line, we'll run the command npx create-vite, and we'll type @ and give it a version. So you can find the version in the description by clicking this link and going to lesson 6, and you'll find the version of Vite that we're going to use, as well as the full command. By the way, the version that you see in this video might be different than the version you see on your page. You should always use the version that you see on your page. I did this because it's hard to update the video, so this lets me easily update the version in the future. So select the version on your page, copy. So I'm going to paste the version here and press enter. For the project name, let's name it e-commerce-project. Press enter. And from this list, we'll press the down arrow and select React. And from this list, we'll press down and select JavaScript. And it will set up a new React project inside our React-course folder, which we see right here. And now we need to go into this folder using the command cd e-commerce-project. And we're going to run npm install to install all of the packages inside package.json. So we'll run npm install. Once we have everything installed, we can run this project using the command npm run dev. And now we can open this project using this URL in the browser. So we'll select this URL and copy. And in the browser, we're going to create a new tab. And then here, we'll paste. And now we have a new React project. Before we start updating the code, we're actually going to review a tool called Git. Git helps us track changes in our code, and it's useful in bigger projects because we're going to be making lots of changes, and it's easy to forget what we changed. So Git will help us track our changes. We're going to go to our code, and we're going to open the Git section here. If you already have Git installed, it should say initialize repository. If you do not have Git installed, you can click this link in the description, go to lesson 6, and follow these instructions to install Git. Once you have Git installed, we'll click initialize repository. Now, a repository is just a folder where Git is tracking changes. At first, Git will tell us that all of these files, or everything inside our React-course folder, is new. And that's because a repository starts out as empty. So Git considers all of these files as new files. We'll go back to the Git section, and we'll scroll up, and we're going to save all of these files into Git. At the top, we'll type a message to describe our changes. So let's type the message, add the starting files, and press commit. Commit means we're going to save these changes into Git. Now, you might run into an error when using Git, and it tells you have to configure your username and email. To do that, you can run these two commands in the command line and choose your username and choose the email you want to use. And try to commit again. And now it should work. If it asks to confirm, you can press yes. And now Git will start tracking any new changes that we make. For example, if we go into our code and open the e-commerce project and change some of these files, we type test and save. And in the source app.jsx, we type test and save. And then we can go to the Git section. And now Git will tell us everything that we changed in these two files. So as you can see, Git helps us track changes in our code. Also, Git lets us undo our changes. So to undo this change, we can click this arrow button here. And to undo all of our changes, at the top, we can click this arrow button here. So that's a review of how Git works. It can track our changes, and it lets us easily undo our changes. Let's go back to our files. And remember that in our React setup, we have a file called .gitignore. So now we can learn what this file does. .gitignore tells Git which files and folders to ignore, or not to track changes. For example, in this file, we can see the folder node modules. So this tells Git that if there are any changes inside node modules, it will not be tracked. The reason we ignore node modules is because this folder is very large, and none of the changes inside this folder are changes that we make. Instead, we generate this folder using a package.json and npm install. So because this folder is generated, it doesn't make a lot of sense to save this in Git. So that's a review of Git. Git helps us track changes in our code, and .gitignore tells Git which files and folders to ignore or to not track changes. Now we're ready to start the project. First, we're actually going to download the HTML and CSS for this project. We'll click this link in the description and then click here, and this will open GitHub. And this contains all the HTML and CSS for the e-commerce project. The reason we're going to use some starting code is because this course is focused on React. By using this code, we can focus on learning React features rather than spending our time writing HTML and CSS. If you want to practice HTML and CSS, you can try to recreate the design on your own after this course. Another reason we're using some starting code is in the real world, we often work on an existing project rather than a new project. So this will give us some practice working on an existing project. So to download the starting code, we're going to click this code button here, and we'll click download zip. And we'll open our downloads folder. For me, it's here, and we're going to unzip this file. On Windows, we're going to right click and click extract all and extract. And on Mac, you can just double click the zip file. And then we're going to open this folder, and we're going to move all of these files and folders into VS Code. First, let's go into VS Code, and we're going to organize all of those files into a new folder. So we'll click the e-commerce project and create a new folder, and we'll name this starting-code. And we'll open our downloads folder again, and we're going to move all of these files into this new folder. So we'll select it, and we're just going to drag it into starting code. And let's save these changes into Git. So then Git will start tracking any new changes that we make. We'll open the Git section, and here we added all of the starting code. And at the top, let's type the message, add the starting HTML and CSS code, and commit. Let's go back to our files, and we're going to go to the starting code and look for index.html. And we're going to right-click this file, and we're going to open with Live Server. And you'll see we have all the HTML and CSS for this project. So now we're going to create this using React. We'll start by creating this main page. We usually call this the home page. By the way, a page or a web page is a single page, like the home page or the cart page. A website is a group of web pages. To create this home page, we're going to move all of the HTML and CSS into React. We'll go back to VS Code, and we'll open the starting code index.html. And this file contains the HTML for the home page. And we're going to move this HTML into the index.html here for the e-commerce project. So let's actually drag this index.html and we'll open it at the bottom so we can see these files side by side. And we'll move the HTML in the starting code into our project one by one. We already have the doc type HTML inside here, so we don't need to move it. And we also have the HTML and head elements. The first thing that we do need to move is this title. So we'll select this title and then cut. And inside the project's HTML file, let's replace the title here. And now we'll keep going one by one. Next, this meta viewport element makes the website look good on smaller screens. Now, we already have this inside our React setup, so we do not need to move it over. Let's actually select this code and delete it so that we can keep track of our progress. Next, this code loads a font or a style of text called Roboto. We're going to use this font in the e-commerce project, so we're going to move it over. Let's select this code and cut. And inside our e-commerce project, we're going to paste. And if you need to, you can fix this spacing by selecting these lines and press Shift-Tab a few times. Next, these lines of code load the CSS for our project. Now, remember when using Vite, we actually import our CSS files. So we're not going to move these over for now, but we'll keep these for later. Finally, if we scroll down, the HTML inside the body creates the contents of the page. Now, the contents of the page should be created by React. So let's move this into a React component. First, we'll create a component for the home page. So we'll scroll up to the source folder, and we'll click this folder, and we'll create a new file. Usually, we create a component for each page of the website. So let's name this file capital H home, capital P page.jsx. Now, this website has multiple pages. So let's create a folder to group all the pages together. We'll create a folder and we'll name it Pages. And we're going to move the home page into the Pages folder. And now let's create a component for the home page using function, and we'll name it capital H home, capital P page, brackets and curly brackets. And we're going to return brackets. We're going to return the HTML for the home page, which is right here. So we're going to copy all of this HTML into our new component. So one trick we can do is on the left, we're going to click this arrow to collapse this element, and we're going to click this arrow to collapse this element as well. And now we can select all of this HTML code and cut. And inside homepage.jsx, we're going to paste that code. And now we're going to scroll up and fix all of these errors. First, if we collapse this code and collapse this element, you can see we're returning 2 elements from this component. But remember, we can only return 1 element from a component. To fix this, we can wrap this in a fragment. So at the top, we'll create a fragment using less than, greater than, and delete this closing tag. And at the bottom, we'll create the closing tag less than / greater than. And let's also fix the indenting here. We can select all of this code and press tab a few times until there's an indent before the fragment. And for the first line, we're going to remove an indent. And that will fix the indenting. Next, we'll fix these errors. We'll expand these elements. And remember, in React, we have to use class name instead of class. So to fix these errors, we need to change all of these to use class name. To do that, we can press Ctrl F on Windows or Command F on Mac to find some code. And we're going to search for the code class equals. And then we're going to click this arrow on the left, and this will open the replace menu. So this lets us replace class equals with something else. We'll replace it with class capital N name equals, and then press this button to replace all. And now you'll see that we fixed all of the ESLint errors. Finally, we're going to scroll to the top, and we need to export this component so we can use it in other files. At the front, we'll type export and save. So we moved all the HTML from the home page into our component, and we fixed all these errors. Now let's use this component in our app. We're going to go to app.jsx, and we'll remove this default HTML. So we'll select it and delete it. And we'll insert our home page component. First, we need to import it. At the top, we'll import curly brackets the home page from a string, and we'll locate this file. So we're going to type / to start in the current folder, which is the source folder, and we'll go into pages / home page. And now we'll insert the home page into our app. So here we'll type less than home page / greater than. And next, we'll fix these ESLint errors. The React logo and Vite logo are not used anymore, so we can remove them. Count and set count are also not used anymore, so we can remove them. And useState is not used anymore. We can remove this as well. And save. And now let's make sure that we saved all of our other files. So we'll open index.html and we'll save it. And let's open the starting code index.html and we'll save this file. And now let's take a look at our website. We'll open the browser and we can close GitHub for now. And we'll open the e-commerce project. And you'll see that we have the HTML and the text for the e-commerce project home page. Now, obviously, this doesn't look very good, so let's move over the CSS next. To move the CSS into our React project, we're going to go back to our code, and we're going to open the starting code index.html. And here we're going to scroll up, and we load 3 CSS files. So we're going to move these 3 files into our React project. We'll start with general.css. If we open styles/shared, which is here, and shared, and open general.css, this file contains CSS for the overall website. CSS for the overall website goes into the index.css file in React. So we'll click general.css and we'll press Ctrl A on Windows or Command A on Mac